I wish I had learned this truth many years ago. Be thankful for the days, good and bad.
All right, welcome to another episode of Warrior versus Zombie, and I couldn't be more excited to introduce our warrior guest to you today, Annalieza Landa. But before we do that, let me tell you why you're here. Success is a journey, it's not a destination. As warriors, we all have a history of ups and downs, wins and losses that are all part of making us who we are up to this point, and they provide a foundation for our path forward. In each episode, we interview warriors, or I interview warriors, who are aspiring leaders from all walks of life: entrepreneurs, artists, health practitioners, business owners, coaches, literally any inspired leader that has a story to tell. They all have a cause, they have unique value, and a vision that goes generations into the future, and today's guest is no exception. Annalieza Landa is an amazing warrior and is known as the Values Differentiator. She is a speaker, an activist, Values Evangelist, and Annalieza's warrior journey as an employee led her to a vision to change our world for the better. I love that. Always love hearing people focus well beyond themselves, which most warriors are. On this journey of impact, she pursued a certification in values-based leadership. That philosophy, and in 2016, set up her own consultancy, Make Your Marque. Today, Annalieza helps businesses grow by growing their Values Quotient, partnering with them to power up their values, and putting them into practice. The result is reducing risk and cost, increasing profitable outcomes. Those are all things that I think most of us warriors would like to have. And her mantra is, don't undervalue the power of values. Values, as Annalieza says, is your navigation system. Directs you somewhere. It could direct you to the Sunshine State, dead end, or off a cliff. I've been there before. If you're not in control of your values, you're not in control. Annalieza founded the 100 Club, Century Champions for Change, with a goal to engage 100 leaders annually in values-led conversations. Annalieza Landa, welcome to Warrior versus Zombie. How are things on the other side of the pond? I do know where you're at.
Oh, David, it's lovely to be here, and so thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really honoured that you have. And yes, I'm in East Yorkshire in the UK, so north of England, by the coast. And it's we're 5 hours ahead of 6 hours ahead of you, actually. Yes. So so it's just nighttime is starting to fall right now. It's just getting dark. Yeah.
And is it rainy there?
It is. It has
I only asked.
raining.
I've been to London area, and I was in Europe earlier in the summer, and it was during the non-rainy time. I did come through your area, but yeah, that's this time of year. Bring your raincoat or your umbrella, right?
And your Wellington boots. I mean, it has been absolutely gorgeous. I have to say that we've had a bit of an Indian summer. It has been lovely up until the last couple of days. We've had a lot of sunshine for this time of year, and it's been very mild. So I'm not complaining at all. In fact, it's still mild. It's just a bit wet. So for this time of year, I think we're doing pretty well.
So what's the temperature there this time of year? Because it's starting to get cold here, but our definition of cold isn't the same as yours. In Dallas, Texas versus Yorkshire, I know that my frame of reference is different.
To be honest with you, I'd have to check my weather out to tell you the temperature.
Well, anyway, I assume you're lovely when a temperature indication. Well, anyway, yeah, enough about the weather. I do want to make sure we have time. Really, you have a fascinating story. I've loved getting to know you and get to, by the way, if I don't mention it further in the podcast, for those listening to this, Annalieza has already done a mastermind that is actually up on the YouTube channel that you can tune into to get more insights probably than you'll get here in our discussion about her current mission and vision and all that. So, but let's do this. Let's take a quick break. And when we get back, I want to hear your story. So let's take a quick break, hear a little bit of Ricky Jean Wright and our theme song, It's Not the Getting There, and for the audio audience. And we'll be right back with Annalieza Landa and Warrior versus Zombie.
But the miles become the teacher while the student learns real slow, traveling blind most of the time. Wherever you go, it's not the getting there, it's the journey every day. It's not a race to see how many people.
All right, we are back. And Annalieza, I'm really excited. I know I got just a little bit when we had met before. We were preparing for our mastermind, but I really want to hear how you got from where you started, that employee journey that kind of informed your direction forward, and then obviously the zombies you've overcome, getting from there to where you are today.
Okay, David. So let's start at the very beginning, because I'm reliably informed that's a very good place to start.
Mm-hmm.
So I always wanted to make my mark from as far back as I can remember. And I was raised on a diet of Hollywood films, and used to love the big coffee table books that my mum used to buy, of the studios, MGM Studios and Paramount and 20th Century Fox, the chronicles of all the movies in photographs, the biographies of stars like Judy Garland and James Mason, Jimmy Stewart, Cary Grant, Marilyn, of course. And it just all seemed very glamorous to me. So I had stars in my eyes and I was starstruck, and fortunately had a talent for drama, speech and drama. And so when I left school, I pursued a career in theatre or show business, because that was just the natural progression for me. I went to drama school. I came out of drama school, got my equity card, and spent 10 years jobbing as an actress. And although I loved the actual, the business of acting, I didn't necessarily love the business of show business. I learned that it wasn't as glamorous as I thought it was,
Mm-hmm.
that there was a lot of exploitation in this industry. And there was also sometimes as well, I have to say it, and this of course has been exposed by many A-list celebrities now in recent years, a culture of bullying, a culture of favoritism in some productions or by some directors. A lot of directors would let power go to their heads, directors and producers. And sometimes I'd go to an audition and literally be belittled for having been to drama school. I'd have photos waved in front of me. I had one director say, she's a tennis player, she's a page 3. And for those of you in the States, page 3 over here, there was a tabloid that used to, many years ago, and it's hard to believe that this actually was the culture back then, used to post a topless model every single day. And that was the page 3 girl. And he would wave page 3 models in front of my face and say, they're in my productions and they haven't been to drama school. And I was very fortunate, that I came from a loving family, and I had the support of a boyfriend as well at that time who was in the industry. But I can only imagine just how exploitative it was and how many how many girls had gone through those doors without that support, desperate to make it into the industry and being exploited, which is why I'm very passionate for the union, the union equity that does so much good work, and I still support it, even though I haven't worked in theatre for many years. So I eventually got very disillusioned with it and spent more time coming away from auditions feeling deflated and demoralized and unhappy. And of course, eventually that started to affect my mental health. I was starting to feel very depressed and decided to try and find another path for myself. I didn't know what, though. My mum had been banging on, of course, go to secretarial college, get some secretarial qualifications, you can't go wrong. But I had never wanted a 9-to-5 office job. I wanted to do something that was exciting and spontaneous and unpredictable, which is another reason, of course, why theatre appealed to me so much, and being in that industry. Anyway, I saw an interview with a chap in a newspaper who was talking about all the different companies he was working with, Walt Disney Attractions, Universal Studios. He'd signed a contract with Virgin Radio. He was working with Richard Branson, and it all sounded very, very exciting to me. And so I wrote to him, as we did in those days. There was no email back then. I wrote to him and I said, I've seen your article. I'm looking for some work experience. This is my background. Would you happen to have any openings for summer work experience? And it just so happened that he was looking for an assistant, and he loved the fact that I had a good speaking voice. He wanted somebody who was well-spoken on the phones, dealing with his clients and talking to the prize winners and doing all of that stuff. I'll tell you more about that in a second. And he said, I'm just going over to Disneyland Paris. When I come back, I come in for an interview. I'll ring you and come in for an interview. And he had me in over 3 days to see if I could pick up the tech, because he wanted somebody to take over the production of some of the radio shows he put out. He was literally, what we say these days is, he was working in his business, not on his business. He was embroiled in his business and he couldn't grow it because he was having to do everything in it. And I so totally know that feeling right now. And it was quite ironic, really, because when I was a teenager, I just loved messing about with audio and tech at home and recording the top 40 off the radio. And the times my mum would say to me, would you stop wasting time and playing about? You're too old for that now. Do your homework, concentrate on your A levels, etc. And yet here it was, all that passion for tech and audio coming into play, because I picked it up very, very quickly. And so when he showed me what to do in the studio, I was able to do it straight away. And I was good on the phones. I was good with people. And so eventually yes, it did lead to a summer job, which led to a part-time job, which led to a full-time job. And I ended up spending 8 years with him and his organisation, which resulted in me traveling to some lovely places in the Caribbean and in the United States as well. And then it came to the point where really I'd gone as far as I could, and there was nowhere else to go within that organisation. I'd been there for 8 years. I thought, I'm going to get stuck on my CV here. I need to take this experience somewhere else. And I applied for a job through an agency for a company that had just won a contract to serve Walt Disney Television International with its playout facilities on B Sky B, as it was then. It wasn't Sky TV, it was B Sky B. It's a long time ago. Wow. Both in the UK and in Scandinavia as well. They've been going for a year before they advertised for somebody to come along and support their vice president of broadcast operations. And I got the job. I think on the basis, obviously, that I'd worked with Disney for 8 years, even though it was a different department. It wasn't television, it was attractions. but I knew the culture of the company. I knew how they worked and I knew how they thought. But television wasn't the same, I discovered, as, I didn't actually say. So what I was doing for 8 years was working in live broadcast promotions, live radio broadcast promotions. So what we did was we promoted overseas destinations on the UK's top commercial radio stations. So we would do everything. We'd match the destination to the radio station demographic, and then we'd get the airtime sponsor on board. We provided all of the kits and all of the engineers. I sorted out the visas for them, and all they literally had to do was turn up at the airport and travel. The competition prize was all sorted for them, of course, through the destination, through the sponsor. And so it was very exciting. Yeah. Got to work on some incredible projects, like taking Virgin Radio around the world with DHL Worldwide in 2 weeks. And just trying to think, what else did I work on? Crazy Ways to Say I Love You actually was a really good project I worked on, where I had to actually set up 5 prize-winning stunts, which including one chap wanted to say he loved, express his love for his girlfriend by abseiling up the side of a department store. There was swimming in blancmange, firing at China on a rifle range, and also diving with sharks. And somebody else wanted a billboard outside the office where his girlfriend worked. And so I had to set all of those things up. So it was exciting. It was unpredictable. I never knew what I was going to be asked to do next. So that's the experience that I had, that I took into the television industry, but discovered that TV wasn't the same. It was very high pressured. The company that I was working for, they had invested in the best of everything. But as we know with technology, just getting the best spec of everything doesn't guarantee that technology is going to talk to each other. And so it was falling over, and it was falling over a lot. And those outages, when you're watching the TV and it says, do not adjust your set, this is a technical fault, those outages were happening frequently, and they were costing the company that I worked for, that of course had the contract, around about £20,000 to £25,000 in penalties. For lost advertising revenue. So you can imagine the tension and the atmosphere in the broadcast operations meetings that I had to minute every day. It was just not a happy ship. On the face of it, it was very glamorous, an award-winning facility. It was like walking into the Star Trek Enterprise on my first day. I had to pinch myself that I was actually there. It was incredible, but not a happy ship. And while I was there, my father started to have some episodes. He lived on his own, and he had to call an ambulance, and I had to excuse myself from work and get up on the train the next day. And this happened a few times. So the fact that I was not happy in my job, my dad was now, his health was starting to fail in some way. Had it not been for that, I would probably have stayed where I was. I was living in London, and I had tried to get a job in radio because I knew radio like the back of my hand. I'd worked in it for 8 years. I knew all the stations, their demographics. If you'd have named a station, I could have told you who their audience was, what their music format was, and their reach, etc. So I would have tried to get another job in radio. But as it was, I came back to East Yorkshire, to Hull. And I started temping. I just started temping because I bought a house. I needed to pay for it. I needed to pay the mortgage. And I just signed up to some temping agencies. And I started working in the public sector, the private sector, academia, law. I worked for a gaming company for a few weeks. And all of this was, of course, experience that was to, again, inform. Everything was experience. The culture in entertainment I told you about was experience of good leadership and bad leadership. What are directors, if not leaders, of their casts, of their crew, and the culture that they were setting. broadcasting, of course, and then all of these, these different office environments. And once, you've been an actor, you are a student of human relationships and human dynamics and human nature, because that's what you're doing. When you take on a role, you are exploring the character, exploring the situation, trying to understand what has brought them to this place. And of course, you're creating the subtext and building the character up in the background. And so that stays with you. And so you are studying the dynamics in the workplace and studying relationships and also studying what's not being said. And so it enabled me to read the room very quickly and read the vibe in a room very quickly, which was a strength. So I really found myself coasting. This is it. I mean, I'd started out wanting to make my mark. And I was starstruck. I'd gone into theatre. I had a sense of purpose. And being in broadcasting as well was kind of, again, there was the glamour there. And I was very happy. Wasn't necessarily making my mark, but I was happy doing what I was doing. And then I came to a point where I guess I was just feeling unfulfilled. I got into a job that I thought was going to be my dream job in marketing. And it turned out to be a disaster, an absolute disaster. I wasn't a good fit for the culture of that company. And I left, and I started to see that there were patterns emerging. There were patterns of behavior, just patterns of things that were emerging, that were repeating themselves. And that started to make me look inward. In other words, I was in different environments, and yet certain things were repeating. There were similarities. What was the common denominator in those environments? I was the common denominator.
Sure.
So what was it about me? What was I bringing into it? Or how was I not fitting in some way? So that's when I started to really shine a light on myself. And then I got a job that I absolutely adored, had a fantastic year. Led that company to victory in the Business of the Year awards, and a couple of months later found myself out of work. The business had lost a huge client. It wasn't doing well, and it had to let people go. And I was the first out the door. Marketing, wouldn't you know? And of course, I tried to plead my case, but they'd made their decision, and I didn't know how bad it was. Of course, I was first out. I didn't know what the story was. And then after I left, I heard that more and more people were leaving. They were either jumping ship or they were losing their jobs. And they had to give up their lovely swanky office and go back to this little prefab on an industrial estate, which they'd been in when I first joined them. So things were really bad then. But that didn't help me. That was no consolation, even when I found out, because I loved the company. I'd loved the culture. I'd put in a lot of hours there. And if anything, that had compromised the relationship that I was in at the time as well. And so that relationship had failed just a couple of months before I was let go. And then I lost this job and this family, because I get very attached to people very quickly. You might have noticed I'm quite an open person. Yeah. So I get attached to people very quickly. And so it wasn't just a job I'd lost, but my work family as well. And my boss had said to me, because I was literally like, I've lost everything, I've lost I lost my boyfriend, now I've lost my job, and now I'm going to have to give you the car back. And he was like, keep the car. Because I got this all lovely, shiny bells and whistles, new car. They bought it outright. They hadn't even leased it for me. And I'd sold my beloved but failing boy racer to a colleague to soup up with his son. So my boy racer had gone, and my boss was like, keep the car for a few months until you get back on your feet. But then things were so bad, he needed it back. I mean, he literally needed to sell it back to the dealership. And so he sent me a text message one day and he said, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to need it. I need it back earlier than I thought. Can you return the keys next week? And at this point, I just felt as though I was losing control of everything. It was like the rug had been pulled out from under my feet, from under my life. And I felt as though I was I'd kind of gone over the edge, that I was literally felt my brain melting down. And the next day I had tickets to see to the very first TEDx actually in my city, TEDx Hull. Right. And it was called Living Beyond Limits. At this point, I didn't want to go anywhere. I just wanted to pull the duvet over my head and not emerge, because I was feeling so depressed, demoralized. And I knew that there were going to be a lot of people from the business community that I didn't want to see. They were going to be asking me, what are you doing now? These are people who, when I was riding high, the phone was off the hook. They wanted to meet with me. They wanted to know me. They saw me as being useful to them. And of course, when I crashed, everything went very quiet and the phone wasn't ringing anymore.
Can relate to that for sure.
Yeah, it's a hard lesson to learn. Yeah, a very hard lesson to learn. Do not, mistake business friendship for real friendship. And really get to know people first. And so, of course, I wasn't actually working. So I didn't want to answer those questions. But I woke up the next day and I really felt heard, this still small voice inside me saying that if you can just get there today, you're going to hear something that you really need to hear. And that got me out of bed. It got me to the theatre when all I wanted to do was drive past. My heart was beating, my palms were sweaty, but I thought, I still got the car. Let's make use of the car while I've got it. And I walked in, as we do, our heads are held high, no matter how we're feeling. Yeah, we're smiling, we appear confident, and yet sometimes all we want to do is run out in the other direction. And that was me that day. I was so glad when it started, we were all ushered into the auditorium. And during the live talks, they were showing some of the most popular TED Talks from the main TED stage on screens above the stage. And one of those was Amy Purdy, the snowboarder who lost both of her legs to meningitis. And her talk massively impacted me. It really touched me. And whatever I was hearing that day, and that we share our faith, right? We share a belief in God. Whatever I was hearing that day was telling me, that was on the other side. That was on the other side. And that's what I needed to hear. And she touched me. She touched me with the way she spoke. She touched me with her authenticity. I mean, there were lots of talks that day, but when I got back home, I played her talk again. And in those darkest moments that year, I just kept playing her talk, thinking that if she could, what we were saying before this started, if she could get through that, I could get through what I was going through, because it was nowhere near as challenging as what she had to face. And that sowed the seed in me. It was the first time that I'd encountered public speaking to really make an impact on a human life, to have the power to change a life or save a life. Because before, I'd always associated it with the imparting of information, of education. Right. I'd never experienced it really on that level to really motivate and touch a heart, to touch a soul before. And I thought, wow, what an incredible gift that is to be able to do that. I would love to be able to do that. But first of all, I had a mortal fear of public speaking that went all the way back to crippling shyness as a child. So even though I've been an actress, and some people can't understand this, there is a big difference between being an actress and getting up as yourself and having the confidence to speak from your own mind, your own thoughts, and the fear of, obviously, as we all have, being judged, of making fools of ourselves, and being ridiculed, etc. And I had been as a child very, very shy, and so I'd never seen myself ever getting up on stage in front of an audience. Even if we did a round robin in a group, my heart would be beating, my palms would be sweating, and I absolutely hate it. And yet Amy's talk taught me that it's not about me. And that's the revelation there, was it wasn't about me. It was about somebody who needed to hear what I had to say, one person. Right. And when I hear people say, you know, there's so many people telling stories, so don't people get tired of hearing stories? I say, no, they don't, because that is the power of our story. This is why we're here, because somebody is waiting to be inspired. Somebody is waiting for that beacon of hope to be lit for them. And so that sowed a seed in me. And I did have a huge breakdown 2 weeks after going to that talk, a really bad nervous breakdown. I did go on some medication for about 11 days. I gave it up on Good Friday because I knew it was making me worse. My doctor's surgery let me down, didn't get back to me with a review that I requested. They said, you know, you okay having a telephone appointment? I was like, oh, yes, of course. I don't need to be examined for this. I just want a medication review. And that call never came. I did tell my doctor sometime later, I said how angry I was because, and he checked and it was never logged on his system. He actually checked while I was in his surgery and he said that call was never logged. I said, well, it's just as well it was me, because I've got this strength within me, this something that holds me up like scaffolding, that made me defiant, that I was going to get through this. I was going to get through this on my own. And I didn't need the doctor. But somebody else could have ended their life.
Yeah,
it might have been
life, right.
Absolutely, yeah. So I did keep going. I knew that if I just kept going, that the sun would shine again, that I'd see blue skies again. But it was very scary. It was a battle just to get from dawn till dusk. And then in June of that year, I did start, to come through it, and I started to recognize myself again. I have to say that during this time as well, I never ever stopped living. I never gave up. I would have the mantra, put one foot in front of the other. I'd literally be saying it to myself wherever I was going, walking along the street, still had the smile on my face. I'd greet people, I'd smile at people, but nobody could see the battle that was going on in my head. Nobody could see that irrational part of my brain arguing with the rational part of my brain all the time, 24 hours. I still went to meetings. I still met with people. I just would not let this stop me from living. But it was nevertheless a battle, and it was an exhausting one. And I was just about 8%, I would say, well, when I got diagnosed with bowel cancer. And I wondered how I was going to find the strength to fight that one, because I was literally physically and mentally exhausted from getting through the breakdown. And I just got through it. I was almost there. And it was like I had another battle to fight. So bear in mind that all of this happened within the space for about 6 months. Wow. So it's literally like, if you can imagine, you're watching like Roadrunner, the Acme lorry comes, bang, splat.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's
that was how I felt. It was just bang, splat all the time. But these things, like they say, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. It's true. It forges you, and obviously with the help of a very, very good friend that year. I got through, and with Amy's talk too, watching Amy's talk, and just getting through the hurdles of, bowel cancer, when you have to have a stoma and your physical body changes. And I was absolutely horrified that, when I learned, I was very squeamish back then. It's cured my squeamishness for sure. Because I didn't want to think about what I was actually made of on the inside. And when I first went in for the operation, because they moved very, very quickly, obviously they did. Within a couple of weeks, I was there in the hospital. I had the MRI. They were like, it hasn't spread. It hasn't spread. We want to get you in for surgery as quickly as possible. And they didn't have time to tell me. They didn't have time to tell me what it involved. There was so little information, and I really went in, blind for that, to go in for the surgery, and I was terrified. I was terrified because what I haven't mentioned actually so far is that when I was working in broadcasting, in radio, my mum died. So my mum died very suddenly when I was 33. And she'd gone in for a procedure and she'd been let down by private healthcare, then the NHS as well, who I have to say were trying to sweep up from the private healthcare. So they were trying to do their best. It was too late. And she died 4 days later, having gone in for a biopsy. Wow. And so that had instilled in me a fear, a terror, of actually going to hospital. I associated, if you go in, you're not going to come out. Having actually, when I was younger, been very gung-ho about it. I'd had a few procedures and I'd been quite confident. And of course, I suppose when we're younger, we don't really have that sense of mortality that we do as we get older. And so I was very, very nervous. And then when the stoma nurse, bless her, she started to mark me up with a felt pen, I was like, "What are you doing?" And she was like, this is where your bowel comes out. And I was like, no, I literally freaked. I mean, I really did. It sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I didn't. I wasn't prepared for that. Mm-hmm. I was like, this is going to come out of my stomach. And I couldn't go through with it. I literally couldn't go through with it. I was so stressed out and so anxious that morning that I legged it. Yeah, I think I made the right decision for me as well, because let's face it, if you're going to go into the operating theatre with your blood pressure high, you're stressed out and you're anxious, you're not going to give yourself the best chance. So I made the decision not to go ahead with it. The hospital were brilliant. They fully supported me. And I went back the following week, I think it was just 7 days later, having had time to mentally prepare for what was going to happen, get my head around it. I kept the felt tip, the dot on my stomach. So every day I was able to imagine what was going to be there. And that was really important to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I went back, although I was still nervous, I was prepared and I knew what was going to happen. And I had more information, and that is really important. So wow. Had that, got through that. 2 years I had my stoma. By choice, I have to say. I could have had it reversed about 6 months. I think 6 months after the operation, I had a test to see whether it could be reversed, because not all of them can be. But they told me it could be. But I really wanted to wait until I felt as though I was ready for another procedure to go under the knife again, because mentally and physically, I wanted to give my body time to recover. It's a massive, I didn't even realize myself until I'd had this done, but they were telling me that anything on the abdomen, it's huge. It's like the biggest organ in the body. So it's major. And you have to listen to yourself. You have to be ready for it and not let other people put you under pressure. All this time, of course, was giving me time to think, time to assess what it is that I wanted to do, because I'd realized that I was moving further and further and further away from a desire to make an impact. And whereas in my younger days, the being starstruck, the pursuing theatre, that was all about me. That was all about making my mark, but it was very ego driven, put it that way. But I was changing slowly. I was changing. It started to shine the light in on me. I started to learn about me. I started to expose those little dark corners that we don't like to go into, and take a little brush to them and start sweeping them out. I started to assess my values and the values that my life had been built on, up to that point, and how that was reflected in my life and in my relationships as well. And I knew that I wanted to work with people. I obviously had this epiphany watching Amy Purdy and wanting to talk. Mm-hmm. And in 2014, I was baptized. So this was a few months after I had the stoma reversal. I'd already been attending a Pentecostal church here in my hometown. As soon as they announced they were having an all-campus baptism, there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that I wanted to be baptized. And it was after that that leadership really just, it came on my heart. It was everywhere that I looked, and I went down the rabbit hole of it. I just followed it until it led me, of course, to Maxwell Leadership, which I joined at the end of 2015, and then set up Your Marque in 2016. So Maxwell Leadership, or the John Maxwell team, as it was called then, it rebranded earlier this year.
Right.
Really just to reflect the fact that John is getting older, and of course they're preparing for legacy, they're preparing for succession, as they teach leaders to do. That's they're very emphatic about that. Preparing for succession. And so they felt it was time now to, like they said, John's not going anywhere, do not worry, John is not going anywhere, but we want to prepare, and it needs to be less led by John's personality, and it needs to be more about the philosophy. So they rebranded it. And of course, I loved the values. It was based on Christian principles, of course, with John being a church leader, having been a church leader and still a pastor. And of course, they trained us in values-based leadership and coaching and speaking. It ticked all the boxes for me. And it's been a wonderful experience, in as much as I've made so many wonderful friends, from all over the world. And it has grown me. And sometimes because, the culture doesn't necessarily translate over here. Sometimes, the kind of like the very, how can I put it? Gregarious, energetic energy. Which I love and have always loved. Well, you can imagine, we'd know this, what the British Reserve.
Very, very serious. Hey, let's do this. I want to get into your values-based and that kind of thing. And by the way, thank you it's been brilliant. I mean, I love the story. I was captivated hearing your story, the challenges that you've overcome. I mean, there's so many things along the way of you getting from where you started to where you are today that have often derailed many of us. And I appreciate your candor. I know that the warriors listening to this are going to go, wow, she's just got from one thing to the next thing. I mean, the whole 6 months with all that stuff happened. I mean, all of those things to me are just so impressive that you were able to do the thing that you decided to do, which was put one foot in front of the other. And the reality of it is, and I do know you're a Christian, and on this podcast, we don't necessarily beat people over the head with that, but I'm not ashamed of that either. I'm not unwilling to share that. And I will say that I've learned that God always brings you, if you let him, the things that you need at a time. But other people can look at that and go, I don't know how I would ever get through that or whatever. All I can say is you will, if you choose to have that connection and be willing to just move forward, which is one of our warrior principles that we go through. But let's do this. Let's take a quick break, and we'll hear a little more for the audio audience of our theme song, It's Not the Getting There, from Ricky Jean Wright. And we'll be right back with Annalieza Landa and hear her vision.
It's not a race to see how many people know your name. One day you realize time was worth more than the gold. It's not the getting there. When you get there, you'll know. Funny how wisdom and youth are always different games.
I got to tell you, we are very aligned, and I knew that already, and so I'm excited. I mean, there's different parts of your story, different paths. There's so many things. I've got a son who is a radio, television, film major. Now he's into nonprofits. It's kind of fascinating for me just thinking about all the things and all the people in the audience that would be served by your story today. So on your journey, you got from where and this is, and now you're focused on values-based leadership, and you're connected with John Maxwell, and there's a lot of powerful things there. So tell us, I already kind of know why you're doing what you're doing, but and you have obviously with your experiences and background, a lot of unique value. But tell me about that and how and what kind of impact you're hoping to have.
Yeah, so as I say, I mean, Maxwell leadership is about values-based leadership. So it's not about operational leadership, it's not about strategy, it's steeped in behavior, it's steeped in people. It's people-driven leadership. And so, yes, I've been training, I've been coaching, I've obviously done some speaking. Generally just delivering John's core principles on values-based leadership and helping, encouraging leaders, I suppose, to be more servant-hearted and heart-led, and of course all the advantages that brings. But I started to get really fascinated by the subject of values, as you can tell, especially with the branding of the Values Differentiator. Because it dawned on me that everything is about values. So when I was talking about bad leaders and good leaders, really, I was talking about what their values and what made them, bad leaders or good leaders, and bad management practice and good management practice, healthy economies and unhealthy economies, thriving communities and barely surviving communities. If we look at the root of all of these things, and the policies, the policy making, it goes back, it always comes down to values in the end. Our lives are reflected, a reflection of our values. Where we are today is exactly, the destination that our values have been driving us, whether we actually realize it or not. As I say, and as you said at the beginning, we're either going to the sunshine state, they're taking us somewhere beautiful, or they're taking us to a dead end, or they're driving us off a cliff. And when you're aware of that, when you become aware of that, it's very, very powerful. When you start to go deeper into your values, what your values are, what's driving them, where they're rooted, who they've come from, if they're even your own values. And, I've been brought up in very God-fearing family. So I've had a relationship with God from a very early age. And yet, as we know, with many young people, we lose it. We go our own way. We're headstrong. We say, we don't need that anymore. I can do my own thing. I can make my own decisions. And I don't need this blueprint. It's not just about, I should say, a moral compass. And I think some people confuse our personal values with our moral compass too. Sometimes, yes, they can cross over, but of course, our moral compass very much comes, of course, from the Ten Commandments and the Old Testament. But our values are very personal to us, and they don't necessarily need to be the same as our moral compass. So really, we should live lives that are underpinned, to live happy lives. And they, believe me when I say I've learned this from painful experience. I am not whiter than white by any stretch of the imagination. In actual fact, while taking this mantle, I do believe it's a mantle that has been given to me. Like when you're given something and you don't really want it, it's like,
Yep.
It was like Moses, right? I don't really want this. I don't really want this job. You're picking the wrong person, God. You're picking the wrong person. Don't give it to me. First of all, I can't speak. I stammer.
You can find that all through the Bible, right? From Gideon to Moses to, you pick a very few people signed up for the job. They may have been the right person in retrospect, but yeah, we never signed. I totally, and I know the warriors on this will all recognize that. One of the things you said very early that I think was, it's not about me. And you're here, whether you realize it or not, to be here and to be an impact. And you are having an impact, positive or negatively, and it is informed by your values. And you and I are very aligned on that. And we've got so much of lack of values and ends justify the means kind of approach to life right now that we see in I know I know I see it on this side of the pond, as we say, over here in the US, but I also know you guys are seeing it over there in Europe, and the whole, it's like, okay, forget about people, and it's always about people. The only thing we can take into eternity, good or bad, are people. So, and if you're a leader, people need to align with you. So that's, I mean, it's so beautiful. So, as you're going through this, and in your story, it was so powerful that for me, and I would encourage anybody, go back and listen to her story again, because there's so many warrior nuggets that she illustrated there in her story that I couldn't find a place to even interrupt. I just really wanted to hear it from as she shared it. So I thank you for sharing that. So tell me, now that you've embraced the values, the strength, your own values and your own strength and ability to communicate and speak and do these things, what is it you're focused on right now? And I know you're focused on some things from our mastermind, but also what kind of impact are you personally hoping to have?
Yeah, it really is just I want to focus on speaking. I want to make a bigger impact. I want to just reach as many people as possible. I found my voice. I found, thanks, thank you, God, for giving me this, this voice and this confidence and this, this epiphany, this realization that, as you say, it's not about me. Like I say, didn't want it. And I just want to say as well, for people watching, it's one of the reasons why when I say, I don't want it, this isn't for me, is because I know that there will be people who'll be saying, I know you. I know you're not wiser than right. I know that, you did this or you did that. And absolutely, I've done things that I wish I hadn't done, that I feel remorse about, that I wish I could turn the clock back and undo those things, or I wish I'd had, knowing, if I'd have known I was going to lose my mum that early, I would certainly have treated her kinder, with more respect. We had we loved each other to bits, but I was an only child, and we had a very typical mum-daughter relationship, and so we were either totally best friends. Yeah. And or of course we were, at loggerheads with each other. And I honestly thought, and it's kind of weird the way that our minds work in grief. I mean, I was with her, I was holding her hand when she passed away. And I saw her obviously after she'd been disconnected from everything and before she was taken away. And yet, and of course I was there at the funeral. I was there throughout it all, and yet was in complete denial. Was in total denial. And it didn't really hit me until I went back to work. So I took, my boss gave me the week off, and I went back to work. And my mum, bless her, she was always ringing me out, because I worked about 10, 15 minutes from home. I was living back at home at the time. And she was always ringing me up saying, "You're going to come home for lunch?" And I'd be like, "Oh, Mum, for goodness sake, how old do you think I am?" All this kind of stuff. Am I going to come home for lunch? But honestly, when I look back on it now, they were precious words. "Are you going to come home for lunch?" Because they said so much about how much she loved me in spite of my flaws, how much she wanted to spend time in my company, and how aware she was now that I am, approaching my mum's age when she died, how aware of her mortality she was, and she knew. You get that wisdom, and it's something that your kids will never understand, because that's just a paradox, isn't it? They can't. How can you, when you're young, understand that, that you suddenly become very aware and know how fragile life is. And she wanted to spend that time with me. And I didn't appreciate it at the time as I do now. So I really thought that this was some divine conspiracy, that they were in league, and that I was kind of like, okay, I've learned my lesson. And that my mum was somehow miraculously going to walk up the path and I'd be like, okay, I really appreciate you and I love you and I'm never going to argue with you again. Or that I was going to get some phone call. I mean, it was when the phone never rang, right? It was that first day back in the office.
Yeah.
That silence just hit me like thunder. And I locked my office door and I sobbed for the first time. Just the whole week, that week I was, like I say, in some kind of denial, on some kind of, I don't know what you call it, almost a high. It's like a really weird thing that happens, that somehow you cope, you find a coping mechanism. But then it hit me and she's gone. I was waiting for her to call from heaven and say, I'm okay, I'm here, I got here okay, right. Don't worry, everything's fine, it's great. Nothing. And the finality of it hit me. So I just want to say, I've been there. I am not without my flaws. Right. I think it's supremely ironic that God chooses people who, on the face of it, are so unqualified to do things, and yet he qualifies us to do things even if we don't want it, because we know that there are people out there who can call us out on things, and yet somehow it would be cowardice and it would be, to deny it and to say I don't want it and not go through with it because you're afraid of that. You have to say, well, you know what, if I'm going to turn that mess into my message, I have to own it. And if somebody calls me out, I have to own it and say, yes, but you know what, I've been on a journey. Mm-hmm. And this, if I could just say something for any young people or parents with young people watching this, the message that I'd like, if I speak to any schools, it's be careful what you do, be careful what you say, be careful how you treat people always. Because I think, again, when we're younger, we think if we make mistakes, no matter what we are, and we're never, deliberately set out to hurt anybody, but people would get caught up in the crossfire of my willful selfishness. It's all about my happiness. It was all about me. So I wasn't really thinking about anybody else. And so people would get caught up in that. It wasn't deliberate, but it was inconsiderate, right? Mm-hmm. People will always remember. And even if you go on a journey of change and transformation, as I've been on this journey in transformation, what Maya Angelou said about people will never forget how you made them feel. They won't. And they won't, if you treat somebody remissly in your 20s, they're still going to be around in your 40s and your 50s. Yep. They will only remember you for that. They won't know your journey. And to be honest with you, why should they care about it? That's your journey. And they've had their journey, but they will always remember it. And that was brought home to me, actually, by somebody who looked at my LinkedIn profile. I should say reinforced, not brought home, because I've known this for a while now, but reinforced when somebody that I was at school with, who wasn't nice to me, okay? He was the head boy, and he wasn't nice to me. He looked at my LinkedIn profile recently, and I just had this immediate, wow, visceral reaction. It was just almost like I was 18 again. And he'd said that thing that upset me, and bang, and it just came up from nowhere. It startled me, the force of that reaction that I had. It's really important. What you do today matters. What you say today matters, and how you treat people today matters, because they will never forget. So that's a message that I just want to say. It's important. It's an important one. And it comes again from painful experience. So, but I picked up this mantle. I go with it now because it's important. It's more important than ever, as you said, the way things are going in America and in Europe, our politics, our governments, and what they are basing their policies on. It's very important that we speak up for values, and that we bring this conversation into the mainstream, and that people understand as well for their own journeys how important it is that they get clear on their values, that they understand them, that they go deep, they find out, where have these come from? Are they even my values? And once, are they serving me? Are they serving me, my life, the people around me? Get clear on that. No. And if the hard truth is that they're not, have the courage to go on a journey and change them, okay? Because what I've learned is that our values don't only they don't only govern the outcome, but they also govern, they govern our inner peace as well.
Right.
If we are not living our life on values that serve us, we will not be at peace. We'll always be stressed. We'll always be anxious. We might be guilty. All of these things rob us of our inner peace. And there are things in life that we'd have no control over, right? Things in life that will happen, like losing our jobs, bereavement, sickness, that we didn't ask for, that will come into our lives that we have to deal with. But there are a lot of things that we can control based on the choices that we make, and the choices that we make are governed by our values. And that's why I do what I do.
And that's brilliant. In fact, I don't even, we're going to take a quick break here, and we're going to go into the Land of Plains segment. And usually going into that segment, I say, what one thing would you want us to take away?
I've actually got 4, but I'll go through them very quickly, I promise you.
Yeah, we'll go through those 4 quickly, because I want people to know. I know, for one thing, this is live and will be on my Be Connected channel, but also they'll be able to find you on Be Connected, and I know you're there. And Annalieza Landa is easy to find because she's the only one on there, so that's brilliant. So, but I do want to hear, how else do we stay in touch with you and so on. So let's take a quick break. Let's hear, for the audio audience, our final segment of It's Not the Getting There with Ricky Jean Wright. And then we'll be right back with Annalieza Landa and Warrior versus Zombie.
Funny how wisdom and youth are always 2 different games. The years flew by so fast, is the common human complaint. The memories in our minds turn to diamonds in our soul, and by the grace of God, on down the road we go.
Well, I can tell you right now, Annalieza, this has been very inspiring to me. And one thing you know about me is I don't believe in motivation. Because I believe motivation with some people's ability is manipulation. And I don't like to manipulate people. I want them to find that inner heart, values-based inspiration to move forward on their own path. And so you and I are very aligned there. But anyways, I said before the break, and I mean, there's been tons of takeaways. So for Warrior Nuggets, as I call them. But if we take away anything from this podcast, what would you want us to take away?
Right. Okay. So, well, actually, I've already mentioned one. So that was get clear on your values. So that's one out the way. So there's 3 more. Okay. The second is leave yourself with options. Always leave yourself with options. Don't back yourself into a corner with things. Mm-hmm. Leave yourself with space to maneuver. Don't find yourself trapped in situations that you can't get out of, or that you have to compromise your values to get out of. That's the second thing. The third thing is attend to your character. Don't rely on charisma. Don't rely on personality. Okay, because people will soon see beneath that, beyond that. It's really important that you attend to your character. And finally, respect money. Don't worship it, but have respect for it. And this goes back to, again, my mum, my mum passing away very suddenly. And the way that I coped with that, because I was in denial, the way that I coped with that was was retail therapy. I started spending money. I started going shopping to avoid the silence at home. Mm-hmm. And it was all about the shiny new object, making me feel momentarily, like everything was okay. But then, of course, it wasn't. And while I was working during the week, I could get through. But because I'd been living at home, the weekends were very quiet. I didn't want to be at home. I would get out to the shops as early as I could. Of course, open Saturdays and Sundays. And I would just come back with my shiny new objects. And although, I should have sought help, I didn't want to believe that I needed to. I thought I could deal with this on my own, but it got out of hand, and I got into a lot of trouble, and I got into a lot of debt because of that. And so I would just say, first of all, if that happens to you, get help. Go seek. There are lots of lovely people. Over here, we have Community Money Advice. It is a Christian debt management company, charity, I should say. There's probably something similar in the States, I would think. They won't judge you. I think we fear judgment. Yeah, we fear that finger being wagged and being told how responsible we've been. They don't judge. They will pray, and they will get on the phone for you, and they will help you to deal with that situation. So get help. But more than anything else, have respect for money. Don't worship it, but respect it, because if you don't, it won't always be there.
Well, I love every bit of that. And over here, I don't know if you've heard of Dave Ramsey, but
yes, I have.
I did a program with in conjunction with my church. I led it for a while and put about 500 people through Financial Peace University. And it's very much based around dealing with the consumption addiction. They don't characterize it as such, but getting that piece of having control. So yes, there are those resources here, and frankly, that's interesting. I've had that warrior nugget in a different way brought up, but I appreciate you incorporating that in. So Annalieza, other than getting in touch with you on the Be Connected platform, and I know you're doing some programs and things like that, how do we follow up after this podcast with you?
Okay, so I'm on Twitter. I tweet quite a lot on Leaders of Value. In fact, I'm at Leaders of Value everywhere, I think. Leaders of Value on Facebook, Leaders of Value on Twitter, Leaders of Value on Instagram, although there's only one post on Instagram at the moment. I need to attend to that. And Leaders of Value on YouTube, but there's not anything up there at the moment, but there will be. Okay. So I'm planning on launching my own show, and I hope you'll be a guest on that, Dave, which is going to be called, guess what? A Show of Values.
I would love it. I run my life, you would understand this now that I've known you, is when I retired almost 17 years ago from the corporate world, if you will. 4 of my 5 kids were still at home. All these things about regrets, the things you mentioned in your story, getting to the end of the road and realizing that the most important things in my life, the relationships, the ones closest to me, were not there. So all those things you said, but Leaders of Value, that's where we can find you. And you know what? I run, as I started to say, I run my life by divine appointment. So all you got to do is ask. Now that we're connected, and Be Connected is manifest in a way. If you say, I want to meet with you, the answer is yes. If you need me on the podcast, the answer is yes. That's what God spoke to me 6 months into my retirement, was quit asking, just answer the phone, just serve the people that I bring into your path, and it'll be all right, and you'll be fine. And everything that's happened in my life, including what we're doing here, has been a result of a divine appointment, indirectly or directly. So thank you again, Annalieza. Wow.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Oh, yes, LinkedIn as well. If anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn,
yeah,
by all means.
I've communicated with you on LinkedIn as well. And there's so many ways. And the thing is, if they find you, I know they'll be happy. And so what we're going to do is we're going to land the plane, as much as I hate to. And this will probably be, for those listening, you're going to say, so all of your podcasts going to be this long? You know what? Not necessarily, but one of the things we always do on this podcast is I want to make sure that the warriors have invested their time in serving you, the listener, that you get to hear their story, and that you understand who they are. And clearly, Annalieza, you've done a brilliant job of that, and I want to thank you. And I'm looking forward to where God and the universe and everything, will take us from this point forward. So anyway, we have to land the plane, and we will do that until next Thursday again. And we'll be back with another episode of Warrior versus Zombie. But thank you again, Annalieza.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
It's not the getting there, it's the journey every day. It's not a race to see how many people know your name. One day you realize time was worth more than the gold. It's not the getting there, when you get there you'll know. One day you realize time was worth more than the gold. It's not the getting there, when you get there you'll know.